A very happy new year and a great beginning to 2023 with our very first town hall. We have a great deal we want to cover in this town hall. A few items that we're currently working on and a few items we're going to be working on over the course of this year. We'll be touching on some mini games and some infrastructure and a whole bunch of fun stuff that's going on at the Discord at the moment. So, without further ado, I think I'll pass over to Lollyhops to give you a little catch-up on what's been happening inside the Discord. If you haven't seen, it's rather exciting. Definitely get in there. If you have seen, then you may get a little bit of alpha on how to have some more fun. So, over to you, Lolly.
Thank you. So we have some very fun stuff going on that I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a rundown on. Some of the lore that we've been working on has been gamified in a new way in the Discord, and it's pretty entertaining. So I'm going to kind of give some backstory and then kind of talk about what we're hoping that it's going to be doing for the gameplay and for the community. So about, I think probably 2 months ago, Seamus B. Frog, also known as SBF, promised preferential treatment to all of the different gang leaders in Frogland. Obviously, had to be paid off for that. So $20 million from each gang leader was given to SBF in exchange for 10 fish scales that were basically just an IOU token. He promised that if you gave him this money and received this token, then you would get preferential treatment for all of the gang members with the planning commission. But this obviously had to be kept very much secret. So all the gang leaders were kind of running around thinking that they had gotten the sweetest deal and feeling pretty proud of themselves. And then one certain frog, who shall not be named, was celebrating at the Merc and had perhaps too many Frogger bombs and let slip the sweet deal. And one by one, everyone kind of started to find out that they were not getting the preferential treatment that they thought they were because he had made the exact same deal with all of the gang leaders. And obviously, if everyone's getting preferential treatment, then it's not really preferential, is it? So they all ran back to SBF and see if they could get their funds pulled off of the centralized exchange that he had had them exchange their fish scales and frog dollars for. But as it was centralized, they were not able to pull them off and were not able to keep them, which not your LSDs, not your frog dollars, right? And so SBF made a run for it. He's somewhere in the north, in the northern marshes. We think he might be colluding with the slimy salamanders, which is very notorious. However, his accomplice, Crocoline, was caught by the FLPD and has been cooperating with the feds for a plea deal. She actually ended up handing over 1,500 fish scales and delivering those to the FLP evidence locker, I think about a week ago. However, very shortly thereafter, I don't even think it was 12 hours later, the FLPD evidence locker caught fire accidentally. So there were multiple eyewitness accounts of many different size-shaped Santa frogs all fleeing the scene. So clearly everyone knows there's only one real Santa frog. So all these Santa frogs had to be imposters. So the community has been helping catch those Santa frogs in the Discord, but we're notorious frogs. They've been accepting bribes to let them go. So, which is very notorious. However, so recently the FLPD upped the ante, and so the FLPD is now offering a bounty of 20 fish scales to counter the 10 fish scale bribe that the Santa frogs have been handing out to be let go. So basically what I've named this game, it's called Bribe or Bounty, and it's basically a variation on the prisoner's dilemma, which is also a big, the driving game theory behind a majority of DeFi and staking protocols. Essentially, two or more parties who are unable to communicate, unable to influence each other's decisions, are expected to behave in a certain way. And if they don't behave in a certain way or in the way that they're expected, they might end up taking more of a hit or taking a loss on whatever they had put in. So the prisoner's dilemma back in then like the super strict correct way of it is the two people are caught, captured for the same crime, they're accomplices, and they're being held in separate rooms. They can't talk to each other. And if you rat on your accomplice, you might get out or you might get off with less of a sentence than if you both stay silent. Um, and it's very interesting. It's kind of a little bit of a logic game on seeing if you make a bigger risk, is it going to pay off, or did you both just rat on each other and now you both are in for 10 years, as opposed to maybe getting off with just a year if you guys both stay silent. So it's very interesting. It's a very fun way of kind of playing with some of those mechanics and kind of helping teach in a way that doesn't hopefully sound very preachy. And so that the game is still live in Discord. There's a lot of narrative and lore going on around it, and so you can check out the previous issues of the Daily Splat. There's a lot of lore, and I kind of gave the overview, but there's always good hints to keep an eye on in the Splat. And there are a bunch of OK Froggle commands and other commands that'll kind of help you learn your way through the game and get going and get playing, because while you can purchase fish scales in the Discord, this is also a little bit of a way to feed those who either don't have the amounts of frog dollars to be able to purchase the fish scales, but to kind of feed into the grind mechanics so people can kind of still increase their fish scale inventory without needing to just pay for it that way. And so this will be live for a little bit longer, because each time that you successfully catch a Santa Frog imposter, take him to the FLPD and collect your bounty, you're also removing one of the responses from the bot. So that way, if you turn in an imposter, there's one more off the streets, one less response. And so there's a little bit of a dichotomy there between the possible wins or losses by playing the bribe or bounty game. And then also, if you do collect your bounty, then pulling extra opportunities off the street. So it's very fun. At least I think it is. And there is a very special non-fungible prize floating around there for those who have managed to get in contact with the real Santa Frog. And there might even be something new coming up for those who continue to help clear the streets of notorious imposter frogs, and might see if they can get a little something else if they're clever enough. But that'll be coming out over the next week or so.
So, Lollyhops, I mean, have you seen so far which way are people leaning more? Do you see more people going for bribes or for bounties?
It's been very interesting. At first, everyone was kind of leaning into the bounty, because when you tell the Santa Frog that, sorry, like, I'm going to take you down to the station, he actually offers to double the FLPD's bounty and go double or nothing on that. And that was quite alluring for a few people right at first, and they were getting like their 40 fish scales from that kind of narrative path. But obviously, you don't always know what choice the NPC that you're colluding with in this game is going to make. And so the negative 40 fish scales also dinged a couple people. And so I think more people right now are probably sticking towards the 10 fish scale bribe and letting the imposters run free. But we'll have to see. I think the FLPD might be interested in getting involved a little bit more.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
It's a lot of fun.
You mentioned the Froggle commands. Can you give a quick intro for anyone who hasn't seen inside the Discord how one could tap into this game, how that is played?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So OK Froggle is my joking. It's what I call our not quite smart enough to be an AI yet. But it's just like, OK Google, if you type in $OK -Froggle and then hyphen and then follow that with whatever the rest of your question is, provided that's a phrasing and a spelling and everything of the question that I thought might be something that people would ask, it'll respond with like hints and clues. So you can say like, OK Froggle, what is the prisoner's dilemma? And it'll spit back out the response for that. And you can say, OK, what is bribe or bounty? OK Froggle, how do you play bribe or bounty? And it'll give you the rules. And a whole bunch of other things like that. And you can ask Froggle who is SBF, OK Froggle who is Crocoline, and you can kind of use that to figure your way out through there. And I do keep the Toadex. There's an entire section in the Toadex under gameplay. I think it's under gameplay and then Discord and then bot commands. And it has all of the bot commands that are currently out there. I do keep the current quest under wraps, except for the commands that will help you get started. So like all of the more mysterious, the more you have to figure your way out to them commands for the Santa Frog game are still not posted, but all of the like, okay, Froggle, like what is Prisoner's Dilemma? Okay, Froggle, Briar Bounty rules. Those are all posted in there and up to date. So if you're ever feeling a little bit lost, there's a really good chance that the Toadex section will help you find your way.
And so you also mentioned this Notorious Frog SBF, who's caused a lot of this havoc, that led to this. You mentioned he had an exchange. Did that have a name? I missed that. So legit question, not leading.
I actually don't know that it ended up having an exchange. I think that was it was so illegitimate it didn't actually end up with a title.
Oh, so it was just complete vaporware. Like
yes,
he didn't even have
even have a name for it.
Yeah,
he didn't get that far down the scam. Okay.
Yes.
And for anyone who's new or hasn't been here in a while and doesn't quite understand what's going on, when the FTX thing happened, we talked internally about how we could like educate or use that as content to help people better understand how blockchain works and what happened there. And this was what we had come up with, right? Which was to gamify it into the world where by playing through this module, we start to hit on some of these concepts like economic theory of Prisoner's Dilemma, and then looking at some of these various actors, in the real world that have been accused of things that are not particularly good, and how we could use those events that are happening in real life to help people get a better understanding of how the blockchain stuff works and also provide fun for it. Right. And that's where this one came from.
Yeah. And I think it, sorry,
all right.
guys.
Up to you.
I was going to say, I think this is something that we've been kind of trying to work on through a couple different ways. The whole time that we've been doing Frogland, I know the Nibbler is still a live game as well. But for those who aren't familiar with it, that is similarly done in a way to kind of help educate about the way that the way that Web3 wallet security works, the way that you can query the blockchain to track transactions and see if something is what it is said to be or where it is said to come from. And being able to kind of use these tools and use this narrative direction to help gamify that, so it turns into something that's not super preachy, but still helps educate. So that way, as crypto becomes more mainstream, we don't have to watch things like FTX and all of that happen again on such a large scale and impact so many people, which obviously was heartbreaking and very upsetting for a lot. And so the more that we can kind of educate and help people realize that it doesn't have to be like that, then hopefully that'll help for mass onboarding and mass adoption.
All right, and enough feeling bummed about about the bad things that happened. It is the 1st of January. Happy New Year, every frog. I'm not sure we actually said that. Sorry, Froggy Digital. It sounded like you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think everything that we're doing is an experiment in a certain sense, and this is probably the 3rd or 4th time that we've used this pattern where we develop a content module. It seems very mysterious at first. There's really no instructions. It's there to be discovered for those who want to discover it and want to play the game. And those first couple of playthroughs that have that immediacy and urgency around it are that part's important. So if it seems like this stuff is esoteric or a little bit confusing, that is because it's designed that way, right? Because there's a discovery in the puzzles, and then as we progress through this, more and more information about these modules gets shared out through the Toadex and gets published so that people can come in and play through them again. Very similar to the way, like when a larger game is launched, there's no wiki content online because no one's found all of the secrets, and then after 3-6 months or whatever, you start to see subreddits pop up and other places on the internet where you can go and find out how particular things work together if you want to. But if you don't want to, you can still play through the game.
So are you telling me it's a feature, not a bug? Because I thought frogs loved bugs.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we've got enough mileage out of that one.
Cool. But unless I'm forgetting something, Ed, I believe you had some updates for us, some stuff with the dragonfly. You want to show us, tell us? Are you showing us today?
You know what? That would have been a very good idea. I could probably load it up while I was
no. Yeah. Start telling us about it. See if you can load it up in the background. If you can't, that makes me a bad person.
Not at all. So if those who haven't yet hopped into the Dragonfly recently, to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the Dragonfly, we have updated it with a few interesting pieces of technology. So you now can log in with your wallet that will have your frog inside. You can also invite guests to join. Now, we've built in some NFT loading technology so that you can walk up to the picture frames and interact with them and select the NFTs out of your wallet to then appear in the picture frames. You can then proceed to invite guests in to come and join you so that you can have your own personal exhibition where you can showcase content to them without them needing to have a frog. Provided they have a wallet and they can sign in by scanning a QR code, then they will be able to join, assume an automatically generated name, and be able to walk around and take part in whatever it is you wanted to host inside there. So with that being said, let me see if I can give this a quick load.
So is this feature only available to frog holders, frog and LSD holders, anybody?
Let me just hop in there. So it is available to any frog holder is able to be a host of a room. So they can go in and they can create their own room. They can password protect it if they wanted to. They can keep it public so others can join. They can then get others to join that room. If they don't have a frog, they can still join as a guest. They can interact in the room. They wouldn't be able to change any of the items on the wall, let's say, that would then persist through another session, but they'd be able to come and view anything that the host would want to place in the walls in the picture frames. So as a frog holder, you can be a host. As a guest, you can enter other holders' premises, if you will.
So, and this persists between sessions?
It does indeed. So if you're a host and you set your own paid things, then yeah, you can set things up and they'll remain there next time you log back in.
So this is sounding to me like it's the beginning minimum viable of like personalizing the your version of the Dragonfly. So I mean, whether you wanted to like show off some of your NFTs, just as a gallery, or you're an artist who wanted to have a show where you could invite some people to come check out your actual NFTs, like this is the beginnings of that. Like already that's working. Obviously, more over time, more personalization, more space, might be interesting things, but like the core is there. Is that about right?
That's you're spot on there. And we've even set it up now so that if a guest were to create their own room, they would still be able to interact with the picture frames. But because, of course, they've joined as a guest, not necessarily with their wallet that has a frog inside of it, we've preset some images that they can set on the walls. And we're working with a number of different artists and projects in the space to showcase their artwork inside the Dragonfly, which a guest would be able to enter and still have the same experience that a frog holder may have, of course, with no persistence or any of the sort of the clever back-end tech, but they're still able to walk around and interact and select some cool artwork and place it on the walls and invite other people in. So it's certainly a great step in that right direction of becoming that playground for the content creators, for the artists who want to be able to exhibit their artwork in a higher graphical fidelity than they may have traditionally been able to in other platforms.
That's that's really cool. Did you manage to get a background running?
I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to crash my Restream browser. I'm going to still try it. But let's just
Okay.
see.
If we lose you, then like you can jump back and we'll move on to our next section.
Precisely. All right. Let's see. Can you see anything?
Roll the dice. Yes, we can see some things.
Okay, cool. I can maybe use my camera being on at the same time. So turn that off. And let's see.
Okay.
All right, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, nice. Oh, let me-
Okay. Oh, you're on your laptop. Okay.
Yeah.
So you
the frame rate's
pushing
not
the
working
limits
well.
of its power.
Yeah, it's a bit choppy.
Yeah, a little choppy.
Okay, it's choppy. It's choppy.
That's all right. I'm sure we can share a video.
Yeah.
It was a
Okay.
good chat.
There we go. When you have a moment, definitely hop in and check it out because it is a nice update. It really brings in that Web3 vibe to the guy. And yeah, you can invite other members to come and use as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess just oh, sorry,
No,
you were
carry on.
still going on there. I was just gonna say, I'm excited because, well, it's a different thing starting to bring Web3 into the desktop application side of it. That hey, we're doing the wallet connection in a local thick client, a desktop application. I mean, yeah, there are other things out there that do that. It's not like that hasn't been done before, but that's not, typically your quick, easy lift. It's not the same as putting, Connect MetaMask on a website. So it's exciting to see that Web3 aspect coming into the Dragonfly. Yeah,
there was a lot going on behind the scenes. It might seem very simple to get this up and running, but this is the very first version. We're going to continue to improve this. We actually had to work with Wallet Connect directly to make some changes to the core code in order to get this to work correctly. So we've been contributing back to that open source project, which is really cool. I love what they're doing. For right now, I think Wally, what do we say with Rainbow Wallet? If you use Rainbow Wallet, you can get a hardware wallet like a Ledger connected and get in there. But if you're using MetaMask, then it's going to just be hot wallets for now. We are working, and we do have a section we're going to talk about login specifically. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but this is something that we're working on to try to make this easy for people to connect to our system in some way, and then have all of your persistence and content shared across all of the different gaming experiences.
Sweet. You're really cool stuff, man. And actually, Froggy Digital, you've been doing a bunch of stuff on Crossy Toad, right? And I mean, this tutorial level, you want to tell us some stuff about that? I mean,
yeah, sure. So for anyone who's not aware that we've been working on mini games, we have a number of different mini games in the works while we're building out the larger persistent world. And the first one that we chose to work on is what we're calling internally Crossy Toad. And the reason we're calling it that is it's actually based on a template that was open source that we found online. Now we've completely rewritten the whole thing, but the idea here was to use a game like Frogger that is got fairly simple mechanics that most people are familiar with. The game's 40 years old at this point, and it's just an infinite runner hopping through lanes, dodging enemies and obstacles and things like that. And we've taken the assets that were developed for the land biomes, which if you haven't seen those videos, those are on Twitter, and those are playable experiences that we'll be releasing soon. But we've taken the trees and the shading and the grounds and the shaders and all the other things and the materials from those and worked those into this Frogger style infinite runner. And in developing that over the past couple of months, we've also been working on an SDK where we're building this game with the intention of being able to reuse components specifically, and we'll be releasing that SDK open to the public eventually, and that's going to allow anyone who wants to build gameplay experiences to connect to our backend services, be able to use some of our Web3 integration stuff to bring things into the Frogland universe, right? And so while we were doing this development, what we realized we were missing very early on was a tutorial level, and the connecting the tutorial of how and why this game exists to the narrative and lore that we've developed. So the very first level that we have created actually now is an escape from a UFO, right? If we remember from the original origin story, frogs found a dead alien under a tree, and they were whisked into some world, and then it kind of dropped there, and we didn't carry on that specific plot line. We just jumped ahead to things like Jimmy the Knees murder and some other things that are in the world. So how did the frogs actually get into the world? Well, that those goggles transported them into a UFO, and now you're just a regular Earth frog, and you need to escape that UFO on your adventure to becoming Notorious, right? So the first level that we're going to be releasing for this is that UFO level, and this is the tutorial basically to show how to play the game. It's still an infinite runner. It's a complete level, but it doesn't have all of the other biome assets and materials in it. And there were a couple of technical reasons that we chose to do this as well. One of those was that the assets that we have are a little bit heavy, and they're going to need some work to be able to thin them down and be able to run in the browser. So we ended up working with a couple of asset packs and stitching them together and then thinning those out, which was a little bit easier to start with to create this particular level. So we'll be showing off more and more of this as we go, but the basic features that are going to be in there at launch are going to be leaderboards and being able to connect your wallet, right? And play with a representation of your specific frog, right? So our goal is to get this out soon. TM, there's no specific date yet, but it's very close. And get this in the hands of people in the community and see how you guys like it. And if it's fun and everybody likes it, then we can continue to develop the rest of the game. We can talk about what other particular features we want in there. We have some ideas ourselves about how we would like this experience to be projected and presented both in the community and also to a wider gaming community as a way to try to attract more people to the project. We can talk about all that stuff, later once we get closer to a release. Happy to answer questions, but that's the gist of it. You can kind of consider this as like, early access for other video games, right? If you've seen any other games that have been developed, the entire industry seems to be moving towards this way to start to get feedback earlier and often. And since we mostly work in public already anyway, we're very much trying to be a leader and do that as much as we can.
I think that's actually a really good segue, if I may, just to add on that we are actually doing some testing of other games. I want to give a quick thank you to Baron von Donkey Frog and to Detective Lager, who have joined me in some games of Setters of Frogland, effectively a version of Catan, if you will. So if anyone does want to help out with some earlier testing of some of these applications, definitely reach out to Lolly or to myself so that we can register you and get you on board on the next gaming session. So yeah, definitely a lot of fun, but I just wanted to add that while Matt was adding his piece. So back over to you, Captain Hunter.
Oh yeah, so I was just going to say, so cool on correct me if I'm wrong, but so internally we've been just using the Crossy Toad because of the origins. Is that, I believe, the release name? Have we said that yet?
Not yet. I don't know.
Okay, cool.
I want to wait till we get the assets together. So
sure.
Still trying to launch it
Gotcha.
with some art.
So you're saying, collect your wallet, play with your frog. When you say play with your frog, I mean, to what extent? Is it every trait? Is it like, the skin? Is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah. I think we're looking at doing skin and eyes right now, and the model that we're mapping this onto is very
Cool.
much a standard frog model. In fact, I think while we put a couple of early screenshots directly into Gen Chat. So that was one of the things we were working on a couple of weeks ago. So you select your Notorious frog, and then it'll modify the actual frog model that's in the game. And remember, when we're picking this up in the story, this is right after the normal frogs of Earth have gone onto the alien spaceship.
So it makes sense they don't have leather jackets on.
Yeah, they don't have leather jackets. They're not walking around like humans. You can think of, still trying to flesh out parts of that story. And if people have ideas or want to work on that, that's I think that's a really cool part. I think there's kind of a Planet of the Apes sort of thing that's happened so far, where it's like we just get dropped into the world, and there's these anthropomorphic animals, and then now we're starting to also connect like the original origin story to that too, so we can start to figure out, as a community, how we want to present that as part of the gameplay experience, right? So all of this kind of lends into the lore. These things can be represented in a few different ways. They can be stories, FRPG modules, mini games, AI art, whatever, right? So if you're creative, you want something, some piece of inspiration or something to work on, this would definitely be a piece. I know we had talked kind of early on about there being some sort of a mad scientist that was running genetic experiments, which plays into some of our other partner projects and things like that too. So looking for some creativity here if you guys want to fool around with it.
I think you're confusing internal talks with external talks, but that's fine.
Maybe. Am I the one that's leaking stuff now?
Then the level you said, I mean, like originally we were working on like the levels being the biomes, right? And then kind of it became, well, actually fits better not starting there, and there was a bunch of extra work that was going to take, that as we went down the road, and so switched to actually a different beginning level that kind of makes more sense, doesn't have some of those game asset challenges. So I mean, then the later stages would still be then going back to the biomes that, like, essentially.
Yeah, that's the intention, right? So part of the reason for releasing a tutorial level is to see how people like the game, first off, like at a very basic level, without having to put in a lot of effort into making it very wholly unique, right? I mean, again, Frogger has been around for forever, so like if we're going to continue to invest time and effort into this, we want to make sure that it's something people are actually going to play. And our strategy with some of these mini games is to take a variety of different game and play styles and get them into the community's hands as quickly as possible to see what types of game experience people like. Do they like first-person shooters? Do they like puzzles? Do they like social games like Settlers or party games, things like that, right? So we've got a bunch of them that are in the works that are going to be coming out, over the course of the next year as we frogify them and develop them far enough along that it makes sense to get people's feedback. But in almost all cases, those are not going to be complete experiences, right? They're going to be one or two levels, a handful of different unique things that are plays on specific styles, like roguelikes or 2D platformers or RPG games, things like that, right? But we're not going to, like, we have a lot of ideas about where we would like to take this, and like, oh, that's cool, oh, that's cool, oh, that's cool. But like, it very quickly starts to become untenable for a team of our size right now to be able to develop all of that, right? So
correct me if I'm wrong, and then sorry, let's move on. I don't want to keep you stuck on this topic. But like, say people don't respond well to that first level. I mean, so the way I'm thinking about this is that, hey, there's actually a bunch of things to support the building out of this that had to be done that were very important and valuable, irrespective of whether this particular game ends up hitting the mark the way we think it will, the way we hope it will, such that it's not just sunk and useless efforts if that particular game ends up not hitting the mark, that we get to roll that effort over into the next mini game that we're trying as we refine this process. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I mentioned the SDK, right? So in developing this specific game, we had to go from 0 to 1, right? So we developed all these reusable components that can be used in any game. And all of that effort translates over into the next one. And that's it's simple stuff like connecting to get your profile, wallet, scanning the blockchain, being able to do basic interactions. And then there's a lot of like more technical things in there, like loading images from the server or from the blockchain in a way that's cacheable, so they're fast and performant, and all these other things that we've had to do in order to get this thing up and running in the first place. So even if this specific game does not, if it doesn't resonate with people, that's okay, because now we have all of these tools, and like as we continue to develop the SDK, it will become a lot easier and easier and easier to make different things. And then once it's ready to be shared open and open source with the community, then other people can contribute back to it as well. They can build their own play experiences. I know that there are some members of the community who are already learning Discord, some members of the community who program. For these people who are really interested in this, we're going to continue to do our Thursday $2 Thursday sessions, right, where we kind of talk through the development style and tools that we're using to build all this stuff, so people can increase their competency and learn how to do these things, right? I think that that's extremely valuable, because we're really building this thing together. And that's one of the reasons that we've made these strategic decisions to focus on building a siloed, compartmentalized play experiences, so that we can both get that feedback, but also develop the tools, the style, and the frameworks that we need to be able to build, larger and larger things as we go.
So I mean, like, one of those building blocks, actually, that you kind of touch on is well, I think the next thing we kind of marked down that we wanted to speak about, which is unified login. And so, like, when we previously alluded to in what might sound, sometimes general, of essentially smashing these services together, making them all speak to each other. I mean, really, one of the things underpinning that, and something specific of bringing this all together, is unified login. And that's really taking your 5 wallets, or however many, MetaMask or whatever wallets you have, and your Discord login, and session data that we end up with some of the services we're using, like we use some PlayFab for some state and some other stuff, and essentially unifying that all under an ID that we know, regardless of whether we're interacting with you in a game session, from WebGL, or from your wallet connected on the site, or from Discord, kind of, we know that that's the same person, and being able to push that data around between those things, right?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a very difficult problem in Web3. I mean, identity is probably, I think, one of the biggest opportunities for infrastructure providers, and there are a lot of companies working on this and trying to figure out what are the right ways to do it. In the Web2 world, it's actually pretty straightforward, just because 20 years of development has led to very specific patterns that work, like logging in with your Twitter account and things like that. But because of the expectations of privacy, or at least like pseudo-anonymity that you get with Web3, and also trying to stay in compliance with things like GDPR, we're taking a different approach and trying to use Web3 specific services primarily to do this, so that you as a user are in charge of how your accounts get linked. And then, the right to be forgotten is entirely in your hands, in a sense, because we're not really keeping any of that data. But it does mean that we have to put a lot more design and consideration into what types of services can be lit up when you connect specific things, and then being able to translate that. It's like, as an example, in the Dragonfly, like, if you connect your wallet, we're not tracking any analytics on any of that. We don't know who you are. So there's a field in there for you to enter a screen name, just so that other people in the game world can identify you. But that's just stored locally, and it's shared across your network state if you decide to allow other people to come in. But that doesn't go to our server, right? So if you come there in that way, right now, you have to either enter that value every time. It does get cached locally, but if you want to install and reinstall, you would have to provide that that screen name handle again. However, if we allow people to connect their Discord accounts and like say maybe integrate with like Collabland or other Web3 services that are out there, then those defaults end up turning into the things that you've already given us permission for, right? So if you decide to link your Discord account to your play session, then that will allow you to access the Discord tools that we're building, that we're working on, which is another good segue. But if you don't, then those features are going to be limited. So it's really, you know, this is going to take some practice and some time, but it's kind of like an onion in the sense that like as you decide to connect more and more things, you open up more and more functionality into the experiences that we're building. But if at any point you don't want those, or you decide you want to change your mind, you just, you know, we're going to give you a tool to go on the website. When we allow you to do the linking, we'll also allow you to do the unlinking. And when you unlink, yes, it's going to disable all those services, but any other data that we had that was linking you will just break the link, and you know, it's basically pseudonymous again, and you don't have to worry about it.
So onion in the way it's layered complexity, not in the way it makes you want to cry.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so the center of all of this is the blockchain wallet, right? So that's the one thing that we're trying to use as the baseline, and there's a few different reasons for that. One of the bigger ones is, again, you know, self-custody of wallets is very important to people in crypto. It's not so important to people coming from, you know, other traditional experiences. And we do want to provide a spectrum of decentralization there, where people can come in, say, by connecting their Twitter, and then when they get a wallet, then they can switch over. And then eventually, if they want to unlink them, they can unlink them. But that's, again, there's a lot of complexity around managing all that stuff. So.
But I mean, also there, I mean, going wallet first, you know, one of the nice things, at least I'd think, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, is that, you know, as we go forward, Ethereum as a technology, you know, there's a good chance might introduce some ZK tech for things like, you know, not just pseudo anonymity but actual anonymity, and you know, that's the kind of thing that, you know, might end up getting for free if you're using you know, a wallet first as your kind of
yeah. I mean, the other big one, which sounds simple, but it's like kind of a huge deal, is that we don't store any passwords, right? So like, there's no, like, if there's a data breach, it's really, most of the information is public already anyway. You know, like maybe your, you know, your friends list, but you know, as we look more at like, you know, Web3 technologies and moving on to things like Lens or any of those other protocols that are coming out, the decision to use those will be in the hands of frog holders, right? And you know, eventually the ZK tech will provide layers of obfuscation over top of that stuff. And for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about zero knowledge, right? Which is a specific technology that allows you to use math to prove that you know something without disclosing it. A really good example would be like, rather than having to show your ID, your driver's license to get into a bar, you could prove with an app that you're over 21 without having to disclose your actual age and your address and your picture and all that other stuff, right? So there's a lot of different use cases for this type of tech. And, you know, it's one of the foremost areas of interest for us and research for us. We're following it very closely because, you know, my personal opinion is that this is what is going to really enable people to have control over their own data, right? So right now we're still like in this world where, you know, you can use Ethereum and everything is public, or you can use, you know, a Web 2 service like Google, and like it's private to the rest of the world, but Google knows everything about you, right? And like those are the kind of two ends. And we think, again, that there's going to be a spectrum there where people can kind of choose what their comfort level is. And figuring out the right user interfaces and paradigms for that is going to be a process.
So, I mean, yeah, like that's cool stuff. It's important stuff. It's also the kind of thing that I guess people just expect to be seamless. And it's kind of the whole complexity is getting it to do the right thing without people realizing there's any complexity there. Yes. So that to them it just feels smooth, and I guess that means that you know, there's some other things we also probably wanted to touch on. Yeah, I know. Did you want to speak about Discord bots at all?
Yeah, I got a big long list of stuff to talk here about if everybody's still in. So I
Yeah,
don't know.
I am.
I got 3 topics. Yeah, I know we're coming up close on the hour. It's going to take me more than 7 minutes. Do we want to go
Even is
over?
time.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
go.
All right. Well, get a drink. Sit down.
I think I'm actually going to do that literally. I think I'm going to grab a beer while we chat.
Yeah. All right. So I'll just keep talking, Daniel, while you do that. So there's a few things that we've been working on behind the scenes that are kind of parts of what we've promised over the past year, but play very much into everything that we're developing right now that I wanted to give some updates on. One of those is Discord integration, which plays into the login stuff we were just talking about. The other one is to talk a little bit about the economy and how we're developing the economy as it associates with the game experiences that we've just talked about and the Discord integration. And then the last thing was staking infrastructure. So there were a lot of people talking about staking over the past month or two, and a lot of great ideas floating around on how we can make staking meaningful in our world. And I think we have some ideas here that I think make a lot of sense, and I want to propose those today so people can start to think about them and have a discussion. None of this is necessarily set in stone, so things can change. As always, some of this stuff is already in active development. Some of it is still speculative. There's a spectrum around all that stuff. And of course, I do expect that people are going to have a lot of questions about each one of these things. We don't need to cover everything today because we're going to be talking a lot more about each one of these things over the course of the next few months as we develop and design at the same time, right? So let's start with the Discord integration, right? So Lolly has, for any of you who have been playing the games in Discord, our economy right now is entirely run on Discord. There's a store, there's an in-game currency, there's lore, there's commands, and all of that is built with a hodgepodge of publicly available. Some of them are paid professional Discord bots, right? That Lolly has been managing, and in using all of those, she's been able to build some really kind of compelling experiences and fun that I think everybody's been enjoying. But the maintenance on some of this stuff is starting to get kind of crazy, right? As an example, with the Santa Frog game, I think you're doing a couple of steps manually because the bots won't talk to each other, right? So we've been working on our own custom framework for this so that we can connect the Crushy Toad and the Dragonfly and all the unified login stuff into Discord, and those are going to be the first things that we're going to start with, right? It was those kind of core infrastructure pieces, but the intention behind this is to give Lolly more tools to make her life easier, so she doesn't have to do everything manual at first, right? That's the short-term goal of all of this, is to help us unify our infrastructure or login, make Lolly's life easier so there's not so many manual steps. But the long-term objective is to be able to use Discord and our custom bots as an admin panel for the gameplay experiences. So because we see this as a metaverse, right, there's more than one way to access the same things, and you as a user can choose your own preferred interfaces, right, in some cases. So account linking is probably a good example. Let's keep using that one. So when we build account linking, that's primarily going to work on the website, right? So we'll have there's going to be a portal where you can say, associate my Discord to my wallet, yes or no, give us permission, that sort of thing. Very similar to the way that Collabland works, right? Then that translates into the Discord experience where you can actually see that state change, right? And in Discord, we're also going to give you a management tool to say, disconnect your accounts and separate them. So you can think of this as like, if you've ever played GTA style games, they've always got like a PDA or a mobile phone or something that's like the primary interface, right? In order to continue to get value out of Discord, we're going to make some investments of time and effort into building out these tools that are both useful to us internally, but then also open up some specific commands to users so you'll be able to do very specific things. One thing that the first version of this is going to be checking the leaderboards, right? So for Crossy Toad, when we launch it, there's going to be a leaderboard. You'll be able to see who the top players are, who are the players that are around you, and then also be able to query that into Discord. And then we might evolve that to, being able to support a lot of other functionality that becomes bi-directional, as in like people in Discords in their, in guilds or gangs or whatever might be able to influence the state of a gameplay session, very specific one. And I know I'm speaking a little bit abstractly here because I don't want to promise a feature that we might not deliver. But the idea here is that we can use all of that tooling to have more than one front-end interface, right? We've got our thick clients, our downloadable games like the Dragonfly, things that are designed to run on PC hardware or cloud stream. We've got web-based games that are designed to run on the website. We might have mobile-based experiences as well. And then Discord is kind of the linchpin of the social tool that we use to stitch all this stuff together. And we want to give people a way to be able to interact with the world without having to download or log in or those sorts of things, right?
Right.
And is anything, Bunta, do you want to challenge me on any of that?
I wanted to try and sum some of it up.
Sure.
So I mean, it's starting to me like you're saying, okay, like in the past, we've had like this disparate set of like a whole bunch of different third-party bots that we kind of use different ones for different things. Sometimes we try and use multiple things or multiple ones working together to do one thing, but that's because maybe there's something we want to do where one bot doesn't do all the things we need. And the more complex we get, the more we're going to run into those problems. And essentially instead of having a whole suite of third-party bots, having kind of one bot that is ours, it does all the things we want it to do. So we get all the customization. It does none of the things we don't want it to do. So we don't have to deal with cruft of features that we're not interested in. It's basically, it sounds to me like kind of it's reaching that point where at first it's easier to use somebody else's thing. And it saves you a little bit of effort. You don't have to go build it yourself while you're doing something else. But it's kind of getting to that point where actually it's less effort for us to build our own one. And probably, although I'm riffing here, I mean, there's probably also it's probably more secure, I'd imagine, as well, than using a suite of third-party bots.
Yeah, I mean that part's maybe debatable, but
Okay.
what is important here, and like so, this is kind of a good segue into the why, right? So the next topic that I wanted to talk about was the economy. Right. So if you've been with us since the beginning, we started out with the Discord economy, and then we've always said that we're going to migrate it on chain over time. Right. And so we have a very clear and specific path to doing that. And what we're doing is the intention behind all of this really is to ensure balance to the economy. A lot of games, they just ship with a specific set of assumptions, or whether economic or game or social or whatever, and we're trying to follow a process where we're building the resiliency by testing early and often, right? So the very first version of the economy that's in Discord here allows us to run these types of experiments that are pretty open-ended, that may or may not work out, and we're working with tokens that imply value to certain people, but aren't necessarily on chain, right? And that gives us a way to experiment very, very heavily and to build a set of a balance into the economy and see what are some of the specific levers we need to pull on and how they fit into the story, the narrative, the lore. And so that's why we started with Discord in the first place, right? So now we're getting to this point where we want to connect the economy into these gameplay experiences. We're actually going to lean on a piece of Web2 tech, which is called PlayFab. and this is it's a Microsoft service that's offered. It's basically backend game services as a service. So there's a lot of stuff in there that you would see in any kind of traditional video game. There's inventory item management, there's character progression, leaderboards, which we already talked about. It does, voice networking, in-game currency, economy stuff. There's like a whole bunch of features. We probably aren't going to use PlayFab for all of them, but we're starting specifically with the economy pieces so that we can migrate the economy from Discord into PlayFab, which is all written in, there's a few different programming languages you can use, but this allows us to get the core models of the economy into our backend and develop our own custom logic around how all these things are supposed to interface, right? So like you alluded to, the Discord bots, some of them are incongruent in the sense that they accept one type of data and behave one way, and then another one accepts a certain type of behavior or data and does it in another way. And sometimes, and that ends up falling on, Lollyhops specifically to make manual adjustments to some of these things. And we want to start to automate a lot of that stuff so that we're not spending that time doing things that a computer can do, right? And moving over into PlayFab will give us the connectivity that we need into the game while we're still figuring out which of these specific levers need to be pulled. And it's the next layer of a prototype that's all completely connected effectively. And then what that also does is once we have the core structure of that all set up, that gives us a representation of what this thing will look like in a smart contract. So once we get to the point where that's migrated over and built, we can start to swap in blockchain bits here and there, and it'll be completely transparent to people for the most part, right? You'll still be using the same front-end tools. We'll just be swapping in very specific modules as we move things on chain. And we're going to use test nets for those, right? Primarily at first. And the first, so that's like the V3 here is going to be getting these things onto specific test nets. Those could be layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. But migrating the functioning economy that we will have built that will be resilient and battle tested in certain ways, and moving that stuff directly on chain, right?
So you're saying migrate from Discord economy to PlayFab economy that is interactable with from multiple places, including Discord.
Yes.
Then piece by piece, we can migrate PlayFab economy to blockchain testnet, and at some point we can choose to go from testnet onto a mainnet. Even if it's a layer 2 mainnet.
Yeah.
That's not like the progression?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the one thing that I know is going to come up is that, when we migrate onto a chain, whether that's probably the testnet, there will be an actual migration of the economy at that point. There will be a redenomination, right? So everything that's happening in the economy right now, that state will translate over, but there's going to be certain things that get dropped or get picked up, or lob a zero off the back of balances, things like that. None of that is committed to yet, and there will be ample notice before we make any of those decisions, and that'll be shared with the community for feedback for sure, without question. But the main idea here is that if you've ever played a game like No Man's Sky, for example, they regenerate their world every now and again. And I know some other games do this too. That's just the example that I'm familiar with. But when they do that, you don't actually lose any of your game state. It just gets changed or translated or converted. I can think of a very good example. So they added base building into that game very early on in like the second or third major update, and I built a base, and then I didn't play the game for many years, and then I came back to it fairly recently, and because they had regenerated the world, my base was gone, but all the raw materials were sitting there in a loot box that only I could open. right? And like we think that it's important to make sure that there is translation between that, so that there's value in putting the effort in now, right? Like, yes, we're working with an experimental set of tools and frameworks, but it's a core design pillar for us that this economy is going to translate into the future economy to reinforce and reward people who have been here since the beginning, right?
So I mean,
there's a lot of
the
mechanisms.
balance,
Go ahead.
the balance between like respecting historical effort, winning things like that, and also not backing ourselves into an unforeseen corner of a particular aspect of the economy that is game breaking and makes it end up being not fun for people and too much of a snowball, right?
Yep. We need to be able to move forward, and like the closer and closer that we get to running on public mainnet blockchains, and I include the layer 2s and all of that, even though I know we all refer to ETH layer 1 as mainnet, but once we get into those states, it's going to become progressively more and more difficult to make changes, right? So that's one of the main reasons that we're taking our time with this, and we're trying to make sure that we get these things right, which is a very distinct difference, I think, than from what a lot of other projects do, where they just kind of throw a random token out and then try to build features and values on top of that. We're trying to build the value directly into the network itself, and then the token economy that emerges out of that it becomes implicit in a sense, right? Like, because the game structures themselves necessitate both the supply and the demand sides of those different pieces of the resources that we have in the world, how they're consumed, how they're produced, how they're propagated between people, all those sorts of things, right? Like, once we have that framework in place, this becomes it becomes a lot more clear how all this stuff works. It's just it takes a lot of effort. So
I mean, I guess focusing on creating the desire and the need for a medium of exchange and things like that, rather than providing a mechanism for medium of exchange.
Yeah, and like we've been through this several times before, but there's there's a couple of reasons, right? Like one really is development effort and time. Like, if we if we launch tokens immediately, then we have to maintain all that stuff, and that's going to distract from all of the building that we're doing. Plus, we're not sure that we're going to get the design right away, so like we might have to make changes anyway. And then also, like you said, like we have to actually have the justification for these things to exist in the first place. Like, without them having a purpose, then it's just marketing, and like marketing is very important, but it needs to be supported with substance behind it, right? Which is a great segue into the staking conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so you actually used towards the end of that last bit there, you were saying, the network of interactions and network of frogs, etc. I mean, I know there's a bunch of cool stuff we've been chatting about. I guess to take it away. There's cutting edge stuff that's happening. Let us know about it.
Yeah. So we had a conversation about a month or so ago, in Gen Chat around staking, and to set the stage here around this, like there are a lot of NFT projects that are following this process where they provide some sort of a staking mechanic for some specific token that ends up being on chain that you can earn, but then like the long tail of like what that token does is not very clearly defined, right? Which, it frankly, in my opinion, leads to a lot of speculation without a lot of substance behind it. And in addition to that, staking, at least from the perspective of blockchain infrastructure, means something very, very specific, right? Which is that you're risking something in order to gain a very specific reward, right? And in a lot of cases, the way that NFT projects typically use staking is just to soak liquidity off of the secondary markets. You're not really risking anything. So there's no necessary service provided. It's really just a Ponzi game in a lot of ways, right? And so I've been very resistant to that. There are arguments against that for sure, but I think we actually have figured out a way to do this that makes sense, where we can have staking in our world and actually have that be tied to a specific service. You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, To me, a lot of that usual staking kind of comes off as it's not really doing much on the demand side, and the demand is coming from market conditions. It's essentially supply side mechanics manipulation, and they're manipulating the supply side in some way. Also, people might say, oh, but by staking that NFT, there is risk of what's happening with the floor prices, because you're taking it off the market for the time, and maybe now would have been the right time to sell. That's different, really, than having a risk in that unit, because you're not risking losing your NFT, even if the price of your NFT changes. Whereas, something like ETH staking, if you are a bad validator, regardless of the price of ETH, you are risking losing some of that ETH if you're then a bad node, irrespective of what the price might have, what might happen with the price. So those are different types of risk.
Yep, those are very different types of risk, and I mean there are others. There's implicit smart contract risk and things like that. There's risk of loss versus risk of losing a reward, right? And like a lot of that plays into various types of heady economic type stuff, right? But let's get into the design that we're looking at right now. I think that makes sense. So, when we talk about the infrastructure that we're building, the economy, the games, the Discord integrations, all this stuff, right? There are many different places where we can run all of this. We want the core data layer of this app, this game, and our world to be autonomous in the sense that like it doesn't require us to operate it in the long term, and it truly would be a decentralized platform, right? And so the easiest way to get that today is to just put everything on ETH mainnet, but it's extremely expensive, right? Especially if we're talking about consumables and potions and things like that. No one's going to want to pay, multiples of like actual dollars or even, other fiat currency in order to consume a potion to do a dungeon run, right? The economics just don't work. So layer 2s definitely are showing that they will provide an answer to that and getting the fees down, and that helps, but it's not the entire picture. So there are a couple of the major layer 2s, specifically Arbitrum and Optimism, have official support for layer 3s, right? I think Optimism is called OP Stack, and Arbitrum's is AnyTrust, right? And those are two examples where you can run a private version of their infrastructure that inherits the security from the layer 2, which also inherits the security from the layer 1, and run your own nodes. And these can be long-lived or short-lived. We could spin up a layer 3 to run a tournament, capture all that state, post it back to the layer 2, and then spin that whole thing down. But what we're really looking at is this tentative design where the high value assets like the frogs, the land, the characters, maybe legendary weapons and things like that primarily exist on layer 1 where the liquidity is. Things that are a little bit more transient like power-ups, lower powered weapons, enchantments, various resources, crafting materials, things like that can exist primarily on a layer 2 where there's still liquidity. But then the way that those things are being used in the game state, as in like, what is the outcome of your run through a dungeon, who showed up, how many people were there, all these other stats that need to be tracked on a game server can run on a layer 3. Right. So because the layer 3 has, it just has the infrastructure cost, there doesn't necessarily have to be a gas token associated with it or even gas for the transactions. Now we'll probably add gas just so that there's there's no spam or anything, but that's still being determined. But like through a couple of pieces of technology that are coming out are being more adopted, like CCIP, for example, which is a cross-chain interoperability protocol that Ethereum supports, ENS supports it, Chainlink's going to support it. We can actually shard and segregate the data across a number of different networks and have various levels of security guarantees for those assets, right? So regular mainnet, high-value assets, layer 2s, medium value assets, layer 3, low to no value assets. But one of the problems that we have is if we're going to run a layer 3, we have to run our own nodes. And so what's to stop us from lying, cheating, stealing? Not that we would do that, of course, but you don't need to trust us. You can also run those nodes, right? So the idea here is that we would develop a staking protocol that's based on operating the layer 3 nodes themselves. So like you as a user, as a holder of frogs, because you hold frogs, you would be allowed to operate a node, and then there would be some sort of in-game resource emission, i.e. the staking reward for operating that node. And you're basically at that point, trading your hard drive space and network bandwidth for in-game assets, which I think makes a lot of sense because you're providing a very specific and necessary service to this network, which is helping us decentralize, our core team role and responsibility over administrating the network, right? Which we're always going to participate in, but this solves a very specific problem that you have in video games nowadays, right? Which is that, when older games that are popular, like Go Offline, like Ultima Online or things like that, or, older GTAs, when the larger game companies shut those servers down, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can, hack, you can break into them, you can stand up your own stuff, open source, but there's a lot of work behind that. So like what we're saying is that if for the layer 3 pieces that, we would be responsible for running the node infrastructure, you as the community can also run that node infrastructure. And if anything happens to us, the game will be alive for as long as there are people who want to run that infrastructure, and it'll just be there, right? And these are just configuration parameters. It's all going to be built. Like we will have custom code around some of this, but a lot of the technology to do this has been released in the last 3 to 6 months. We saw a lot of this when we went down to Colombia for ETH DevCon. Both Arbitrum and Optimism, and I know there's some other networks like Fuel, Luxo, some of the other ones, they have really, really interesting solutions to some of these problems. We're still trying to figure out exactly which tech we're going to end up using, but they all have the same kind of assumptions around how that software operates, and it's all open source, right? So as long as we're building on top of those core tools and we have a custom layer that runs on top of that, which will also be open source, then anyone can run this, they can extend it, they can modify it, you can fork it if you don't like what we're doing. You guys can say, hey, you guys made a parameter choice that we don't like, we're going to go run our own version over here, and then you can have completely different instances of Frogland if you want. And we think that having the in-game world tied to the operation of that infrastructure is a very specific and necessary service that can be provided and justifies using a staking mechanic. I know that was a lot. I think it's cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds really cool. And I mean, to me, it sounds like taking, bringing staking back to some of its earliest uses in terms of like people speaking about a proof of stake system where like there's real world effort, infrastructure and cost, that are being applied to provide some service, do some work in return for a reward. And so the more we're able to tie our staking to that, it kind of attributes the real value that the market can ascribe to those rewards and to that effort.
I saw someone in Gen Chat ask like what type of hardware. So this, all of this just runs on standard Ethereum infrastructure. So the hardware requirements are going to be very similar. Like you would be able to run a single validator node on a Raspberry Pi right now, because we're still a small game and this is an application specific instance of the state management required for that will grow with the game, meaning the hard drive space required to operate that will grow with the game. Now, on Ethereum's roadmap, there is, I forget which phase it's in, but within the next 2 years-ish, there's a task in the main Ethereum client to do state pruning and to remove things that are significantly older, right, that are not really relevant to the way that things are happening right now, right? So like archive nodes would offer historic data, say from the original proof of work layer 1 chain, but then the Ethereum clients themselves are really only going to keep 30 to 60 days worth of history, right? So there are a lot of technical things that we have to work through before we'll actually be able to implement any of this. This is going to take at least a year to get this all up and running and get it working. 90% of the blockchain-based infrastructure that we need to be able to build this exists now, but it's still being worked on. It's still being modified. I mean, OP Stack just came out in October, right? So, they might make changes to the structure of that. We have to look at some do a deep technical analysis on all of these things to see which ones are going to make sense, but the operation of the nodes themselves really would come down to network bandwidth and hardware space, or hard drive space for the most part. The compute's going to be pretty low. That does lead into a second thing, though, for staking that I think is also important for us to talk about. So for those who can't operate a node or don't want to operate a node, and the bounds on that are hard drive space and bandwidth. Maybe you're rural and you're running on Starlink and it's slow,
and
right?
Maybe technical competence.
Well, so I would very much like this to be as simple as connect a wallet, sign a message to prove you are who you are, and run a command line app, right? To start with, right? We can talk about if we need to build graphical interfaces on top of it, but frankly, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of value in that. However, there is another service that we need as a video game that is a good candidate for staking, and that is random numbers. Right. So in order to resolve things like loot boxes, outcomes, damage done by enemies, all these things, we need a lot of random numbers flowing around in our system. So there is potentially and that's compute bound, right? That's going to be, it looks a little bit more like proof of work, but it's not the proof of work that we're used to seeing in the Bitcoin and other spaces where you're doing these large math operations that burn electricity. We don't actually need that. What we need is people to generate random numbers locally on their machine and then submit them. And then there's an algorithm that randomly selects which ones are going to be used based on a number of different criteria, right? So this comes out of something that Vitalik had talked about a while back. I don't know if this is still on the roadmap for Ethereum 1, but it was the concept was to use ASICs to generate a beacon of random numbers and push those out on chain so that there was a source of randomness that's not tied to the blocks, the timestamps, or anything like that. Because as we all know, since blockchains are deterministic, random numbers are very hard. That's kind of where Chainlink VRF has come in, and a couple of other VRF solutions that are out there. One of my favorites is not related to blockchain, but it's called the League of Entropy, right? And that's operated by Cloudflare and a number of other different larger businesses that just have this random beacon that's decentralized that anyone can contribute to. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this, but we could associate operating that randomness beacon also with a staking requirement and a resource emission, right? So you basically you have two options here. You can, if you want to provide infrastructure to Frogland, one piece of it is bound to network and hard drive space, and that's operating the node and the data persistence layer. And then the other one is bound to CPU utilization, which should be significantly less than anything else, right? So that you could either run one or the other or both, basically, right? So VRF in particular, there's a lot of value in that. But if we're going to run on a layer 3, even if we decided to use, an established company like Chainlink to use their infrastructure, we're still going to need people to run that and point it at our network. And so incentivizing that makes a lot of sense because it's providing a very specific service to our application. That was a lot.
It was a lot, but I got to say it's exciting. So I think really the whole notion of decentralization in gaming and being able to operate a node that can continue a game operating is so Web3. It's so far from what Web2 does. I think that's a really, really interesting piece of tech to be focusing on. So long as there's someone out there willing to run the node, the game will always live on. It doesn't need to be centralized and reliant on us. And I think that's a really, really important piece of tech. And of course, there'll be bonuses and benefits for operating this stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Of course, like I have to quantify this or qualify this as always of saying that this is, a lot of this is still pretty speculative. Like I said, we're familiar with the technology. We know that it's out there. We know some of the teams that are working on some of this stuff, but it's going to take a pretty significant technical lift to really make sure that we are picking the right tools, that we know that those tools can talk to one another, and that we're minimizing the amount of customization that we have to do in order to give a higher probability of resilience over time, right? We want this game and this network to be autonomous and to run for a very long time, even after all of us here are long gone, right? Like we want this to be persistent at the network level. And I mean, I personally believe that the public blockchains like, Ethereum and Bitcoin and a couple of other ones are going to be around for a very, very long time, possibly centuries, right? In some cases. So for us to design things that can enable those types of workflows allows us to build a legacy around this type of stuff that can exist a lot longer than, maybe we are even capable of supporting it. So I think that's cool. It's cool stuff.
That it is. No, it really is very cool. It's really a glimpse into what's to come over the course of 2023, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is going to be in development for some time. But obviously, with the first town hall of the new year, we wanted to give everyone a little recap as to what we've been working on and what we're going to be focusing on throughout the next few months. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, is there anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap up the first town hall of the year? Excellent. Then, I'd like to again thank you all for your continued patience while we build out this metaverse with you all. Any ideas, any feedback, any comments? As always, we're very receptive in Discord, so hop into Discord and follow us on Twitter if you haven't done so already. Wishing you all a very happy new year and looking forward to the year of the frog.
Thanks, every frog. Happy New Year. Yeah.
All right.
Happy New Year. All right, guys. Bye.